The village square of Umuahia-Nta drowned in torchlight and despair, the air thick with the stench of cursed clay. Obinna, bound to the udu drum tree, sobbed as Obara, his clay-born bride, cracked apart, her bloated form bursting into a wave of red mud that flooded the earth. A heart-shaped lump pulsed in the wreckage, buried by the priestess Adaku as the village held its breath. Was the curse ended, or merely sleeping? Find out this and more in this heart-wrenching, soul-stealing dark folktale romantic story that will leave you at the edge of your seat. Kindly subscribe to this channel and leave your comments on where you are watching from, and we may just have a surprise for you as well. The village of Umuahia-Nta was a stubborn speck of life, cradled between two ancient hills that loomed like the shoulders of sleeping giants. The river that snaked around it, called ATHS by the elders, glittered under the sun like a serpent's scales, but at night, it whispered secrets only the brave or foolish dared to hear. 4 generations, the village had thrived in a delicate dance with the spirits, honoring them with offerings of kola nut and palm wine, carving their likenesses into masks and effigies, and never, ever touching the red clay at the river's hidden bend. That clay, Nta, was forbidden. Its name was spoken in hushed tones, as if saying it too loudly might wake something better left asleep. Obinna, the village sculptor, cared little for whispers these days. 3 harvests ago, his world had crumbled. Nena, his wife, had died screaming under blood-red moon, her body too weak to bring their daughter into the world. The child, stillborn, was buried beneath the sacred udu drum tree outside Obinna's compound, its roots drinking the sorrow of a life never lived. Since then, Obinna had become a shadow of himself, a man who spoke more to clay than to people, whose hands shaped what his heart could not hold. His compound was a graveyard of art. Masks lined the mud walls, their hollow eyes staring at nothing. Figurines of ancestors stood in neat rows, their features worn smooth by rain and time. But lately, Obinna's hands betrayed him. Every lump of clay he touched turned into Nena's face, her high cheekbones, her stubborn chin, the eyes that had once laughed at his terrible jokes. He didn't fight it. It was the only way he could see her. "Obinna, you're scaring the children," Chike had said the week before, leaning against the compound's gate with that infuriating grin. Chike, the village blacksmith, was Obinna's oldest friend and self-appointed keeper of his sanity. "All these faces? They look like ghosts. Sell them, or burn them, or something. You can't keep living in a shrine to the dead." "Mind your hammer, Chike," Obinna had snapped, his voice rough as gravel. "You shape iron. I shape clay. We both know which one lasts longer." Chike laughed, loud and sharp, the kind of laugh that made dogs bark and old women hiss. "Clay lasts, eh? Until the rains come and turn it to mush. You're not fooling anyone, my friend. You're not sculpting. You're grieving." Obinna had no answer for that. He turned back to his work, kneading a lump of clay until it softened under his calloused fingers. Chike was right, but admitting it felt like betraying Nena. So he let the silence grow between them, heavy as the hills. That morning, Obinna woke with a heaviness in his chest, as if the air itself had turned to stone. The village was quiet, save for the distant crow of a rooster and the chatter of women at the communal well. He trudged to the riverbank, his bare feet sinking into the cool earth, his woven basket slung over one shoulder. The ATHS shimmered under the dawn light, its surface unbroken except for the occasional ripple of a fish. He needed clay, fresh, untouched, the kind that felt alive under his hands. He was halfway to his usual spot when he heard it. A hum. It wasn't the wind, though the breeze carried the scent of wild hibiscus. It wasn't the river, though its waters lapped gently at the bank. It was a voice, female, low, and aching, like a song sung through tears. Obinna froze, his basket slipping to the ground. The sound came from the forbidden bend, where the river curved sharply and the trees grew thick, hiding a mound of red clay no one dared touch. Nta, clay of the spirits. "Leave it," his mother's voice echoed in his mind, a memory from childhood. "That clay belongs to those who walk unseen. Touch it, and you invite their wrath." Obinna wasn't a child anymore. He was a man hollowed out by loss, a man who heard his wife's laughter in the wind and saw his daughter's face in every shadow. He stepped toward the bend, his heart pounding like the drums at a harvest festival. The hum grew louder, weaving through the air, wrapping around him like a lover's arms. It wasn't just sorrowful, it was desperate, pleading, as if something trapped needed to be freed. He pushed through the tangle of vines and roots, his hands trembling. There it was, a mound of red clay, glistening wet despite the dry season, its surface smooth and untouched. The hum pulsed from it, vibrating in his bones. He knelt, his fingers hovering over the clay. Every story he'd ever heard screamed at him to turn back. Tales of spirits who lured men to their doom, of ancestors who cursed the greedy and the reckless. But Obinna wasn't greedy. He was empty. And emptiness was louder than fear. He plunged his hands into the clay. It was warm, unnaturally so, like the skin of a living thing. It yielded to his touch, soft and pliant, but it clung to his fingers, reluctant to let go. He dug deeper, scooping handfuls into his basket, the hum growing louder until it drowned out the river, the birds, his own ragged breaths. When he finally stopped, his hands were stained red, and the hum had faded to a whisper, like a sigh of relief. "You shouldn't have done that," a voice said behind him. Obinna spun around, nearly dropping the basket. Nkechi, the village's youngest healer, stood at the edge of the bend, her arms crossed and her eyes narrow. She was barely 20, but her presence carried the weight of someone twice her age. Her wrapper was tied tightly around her waist, and her hair was braided in intricate patterns, each bead glinting like a warning. "Spying on me now?" Obinna growled, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Go back to your herbs, Nkechi." She didn't flinch. "You think I'm here for gossip? That clay," she pointed at the basket, her voice dropping to a hiss, "is trouble. You know the stories. You know what happened to Okoro's father." Obinna's jaw tightened. Okoro's father, a fisherman, had taken clay from Nta in Dimuo decades ago. He'd sculpted a figure of his late wife, they said, and the next day, he was found floating in the river, his eyes wide open, his hands clutching nothing. The village called it a warning. Obinna called it a coincidence. "Stories are just stories," he said, hefting the basket onto his shoulder. "And I'm not Okoro's father." Nkechi stepped closer, her voice softening but no less sharp. "You're not the only one who's lost someone, Obinna. But you don't see me digging up forbidden things to ease my pain. That clay sings because it wants something. You think it's calling to you out of kindness." He wanted to snap back, to tell her to mind her own business, but her words cut too close. The hum had felt personal, like it knew him, like it knew Nena. He turned away, his throat tight. "I don't need your warnings, Nkechi. Go heal someone who cares." She watched him go, her silhouette framed against the river. And for a moment, Obinna felt the weight of her gaze heavier than the clay in his basket. That night, under a full moon that hung low and fat in the sky, Obinna worked. His compound was lit by a single oil lamp, its flame flickering like a nervous heartbeat. The red clay sat on his workbench, gleaming even in the dim light. It was different from the clay he usually used, smoother, warmer, almost pulsing under his touch. He didn't question it. He didn't want to. He began to sculpt. His hands moved with a purpose they hadn't felt in years. The clay obeyed, yielding to every press of his fingers, every curve of his palm. He shaped arms first, long and graceful, the kind that could wrap around a man and make him forget his sorrows. Then a waist, narrow but strong, the kind that swayed when Nena danced at the harvest festival. Breasts, full and heavy, like the ones he'd rested his head on during quiet nights before everything fell apart. He worked for hours, losing himself in the rhythm of creation, the hum from the riverbank echoing faintly in his mind. By dawn, he was shaping her face. He gave her Nena's nose, sharp and proud, the kind that wrinkled when she laughed. He carved a smile he'd never seen but always imagined, his daughter's, soft and hopeful, the smile of a child who might have lived. And her eyes, Those came from somewhere else. Not memory. Not reality. But a dream he'd had, night after night, since Nena's death. Eyes that saw through him. Eyes that knew him better than he knew himself. For 3 days and nights, he didn't eat. Didn't sleep. The village noticed. Chike came by, banging on the gate, shouting about how Obinna was starving himself for ghosts. Nkechi lingered nearby, her warnings now silent, but her presence a constant rebuke. Even the children stopped playing near his compound, their laughter replaced by whispers about the mad sculptor and his singing clay. On the 3rd night, he finished. The figure stood taller than he'd planned, nearly as tall as he was, her form perfect in a way that made his chest ache. She was neither Nena nor their daughter, but something more. A fusion of all he'd lost and all he'd longed for. He knelt before her, hands trembling, and whispered, "Your name is Obara. You are all I've lost." He carried her to the Udu drum tree, its gnarled roots curling like fingers into the earth. The ground beneath it was sacred, marked by the tiny grave he'd dug 3 harvests ago. He set Obara down gently, her clay form glowing faintly under the moonlight. For the first time in years, Obinna felt empty, not the hollow ache of grief, but a strange, quiet peace. He curled up at her feet, the cool earth against his cheek, and let sleep take him. The village of Umuahia-Nta had always known fear, but it was the quiet kind, fear of lean harvests, of fevers that stole children, of spirits placated by kola nut and whispered prayers. Now, a new fear bloomed, sharp and jagged, rooted in the compound of Obinna the sculptor. The air around his hut felt heavier, as if the hills themselves leaned closer to watch. The Ezichi River, once a gentle guardian, churned restlessly, its waters muddy even under clear skies. And the Udu drum tree, where Obinna's stillborn daughter lay buried, creaked at night, though no wind stirred its branches. Obinna had changed. Where once he'd been silent, his voice now filled the compound, but not for the living. He spoke to her, the statue he'd named Obara, the clay woman born of forbidden Nta. He bathed her with water drawn from the river, his hands trembling as he poured it over her smooth curves, whispering apologies for the cold. He draped her in Nena's old wrappers, the ones patterned with yellow suns and green vines, tying them carefully as if she might feel the knots. He placed of leaves, sacred to the ancestors, in her clay hands, muttering words no one could hear. The village noticed. Children, bold as only children can be, crept to the edge of his compound, giggling behind their hands. Obinna's married a statue. They chant, scattering when he glared from his doorway. The elders were less amused. At the market square, under the shade of the Iroko tree, they huddled, their voices low and urgent. "He's gone mad," said Mazio Keke, his walking stick tapping the ground like a judge's gavel. "Grief is one thing, but this is blasphemy." Nkechi, the young healer, overheard and rolled her eyes. "Blasphemy," she muttered to herself, grinding herbs with a pestle. "You lot pray to wooden idols every festival, but Obinna's the blasphemer." Still, even she couldn't shake the unease that clung to her like damp cloth. She'd seen the statue under the drum tree, its face too perfect, too alive. And she'd heard the river's hum, fainter now but still there, like a heartbeat under the earth. The priestess of Umuahia-Nta, Adaku, was less subtle. She stormed to Obinna's compound at midday, her staff crowned with cowrie shells rattling like a warning. Her wrapper was red as blood, her eyes sharp as the lightning her god commanded. "Obinna, son of Umuahia-Nta," she said, her voice carrying over the compound's mud walls, "you have courted the dead. Clay remembers. It holds what you've lost, and what you've woken." Obinna stood in his doorway, his hands stained red from the clay he couldn't stop touching. "Leave me, Adaku," he said, his voice low but steady. "Your god doesn't live in my hut." Adaku's eyes narrowed. "You think this is about my god? The Nta is older than Umuahia-Nta, older than the hills. It's not yours to play with. You've dug where you shouldn't, and now something walks where it shouldn't." He laughed, a dry, bitter sound that startled even him. Something walks? It's clay, Adaku. It's my hands, my heart, not your spirits. She stepped closer, her staff pointing at the drum tree where Obara stood. Then why do your eyes look haunted, Obinna? Why does the river weep? She turned and left, her cowrie shells clattering, leaving him with a chill he couldn't shake. That night, the sky split open. Lightning cracked, jagged and white, illuminating Umuahia-Nta in flashes of ghostly light. Thunder rolled, shaking the earth, rattling the masks on Obinna's walls. He lay on his sleeping mat, eyes half open, the weight of Adaku's words pressing against his chest. He didn't believe in her warnings, or so he told himself. But the river's hum lingered in his dreams, and Obara's face, carved from memory and longing, stared at him from every shadow. A sound woke him. Drip, drip, drip. He sat up, heart pounding. The air was thick with the scent of rain, though the storm had passed. His oil lamp had gone out, leaving the hut in darkness save for the moonlight spilling through the open doorway. Drip, drip. He followed the sound, his bare feet cold against the packed earth floor. It came from the corner where Obara stood, or should have stood. She wasn't there. Obinna's breath caught. He stumbled to the drum tree, his eyes scanning the shadows. There she was, untouched, her wrapper fluttering in a breeze he couldn't feel. But the ground beneath her was wet, a trail of muddy footprints leading from her base to his hut. They were small, delicate, like a woman's, but impossibly deep, as if the earth itself had yielded to her weight. Obinna, a voice said, soft as rain. He spun around, his heart a drumbeat in his throat. Obara stood in the doorway of his hut, no longer clay but flesh, warm, smooth, and damp, as if she'd just risen from the river. Her hair, once a suggestion of carved lines, was long and jet black, clinging to her shoulders like wet vines. Her wrapper clung to her curves, the yellow suns now dim under the moonlight. But her eyes, those dream-born eyes, were hollow, not empty but deep, like wells that held something ancient and watchful. You made me, Obinna, she said, her voice dripping like water, each word falling heavy and deliberate. I am yours. He staggered back, his hands raised as if to ward her off, or to touch her. Nena, he whispered, though he knew it wasn't her. Not entirely. Her smile was his daughter's, soft and hopeful, but it carried a weight that made his knees weak. I am Obara, she said, stepping closer. Her feet left wet prints on the earth, and the air around her shimmered, like heat rising from a fire. You called me from the clay. You gave me form. Now, I am here. Obinna's mind reeled. He wanted to run, to scream, to fall at her feet and beg her to be real. Instead, he laughed, a cracked, desperate sound. Here? You're a statue, Obara. A thing I made because I couldn't. He stopped, his throat tight. Because I couldn't let them go. She tilted her head, her hollow eyes unblinking. You didn't make me to let go. You made me to hold on. She reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek, cold and damp. And I will hold you, Obinna. Always. He flinched at her touch, but his body betrayed him, leaning into it. She smelled of river water and earth, of life and something older. What are you? He whispered. Her smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. I am what you needed, what you asked for. She stepped back, her wrapper trailing across the ground, leaving a faint shimmer of water. Come, sit with me. He followed her to the drum tree, his legs moving as if dream-bound. She sat, her back against the gnarled roots, and patted the ground beside her. He sank down, his heart torn between wonder and dread. The village was silent, the river's hum gone, replaced by the faint drip of water from Obara's skin. You're not real, he said, more to himself than to her. She laughed, a sound like rain on leaves. Real enough to be here, real enough to listen. Her voice softened, and for a moment, she sounded like Nena, teasing, gentle. Tell me, Obinna, why did you make me? He stared at the ground, at the footprints that shouldn't exist. I made you because I'm empty. Because Nena's gone, and our daughter never had a chance. Because I thought, if I could see you, hold you, maybe I wouldn't feel so alone. Obara's hollow eyes seemed to soften, though no light filled them. You're not alone now, she said. But the clay remembers, Obinna. It holds more than your grief. It holds what was buried long before you. He frowned, her words stirring an unease he couldn't name. What do you mean? She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned closer, her damp hand resting on his. Sleep, she whispered. I'll watch over you. The village of Umuahia-Nta was no longer a place of peace. The hills, once proud sentinels, seemed to slump under an unseen weight, their slopes streaked with unnatural shadows that flickered even at noon. The ATHS River, once a silver thread weaving life through the village, now ran sluggish and thick, its waters tinged with a reddish hue that no one could explain. The Udu drum tree outside Obinna's compound stood stark against the sky, its leaves curling inward as if guarding a secret. The air carried a sour tang, like earth turned over after a long burial, and the villagers' whispers grew sharp with fear. Obinna, the sculptor, was no longer just a man. He was a story, a cautionary tale told in hushed tones at the market square, a warning to children who strayed too close to his compound. He and Obara, the woman of clay turned flesh, were inseparable, bound by a devotion that felt like love to him but looked like madness to everyone else. She never blinked, her hollow eyes fixed on him with a gaze that held no warmth, only depth. She never ate, though he offered her yam and palm oil stew, the kind Nena used to make. She never aged, her skin smooth and damp, like a river stone kissed by morning mist. But Obinna was changing. Every night, Obara left the hut. Her footsteps were silent, leaving no trace save for the faint drip of water that lingered in her wake. At first, Obinna didn't notice. He'd wake to find her beside him, her damp hand resting on his chest, her smile soft but unreadable. But the village noticed. Goats vanished from pens, their bones found scattered by the river, stripped clean as if licked by a tongue no one could see. Chickens were gutted, their feathers floating in the ATHS like offerings to a forgotten god. Babies wailed in the night, their cries sharp and inconsolable, their mothers swearing they saw a shadow at the window, a woman, humming, her fingers long and wet with clay. The children were the boldest, as children always are. They crept to Obinna's compound, peering through the gaps in his mud wall, whispering tales of dreams where Obara stood over them, her hollow eyes glinting, her voice a hum that pulled at their hearts. She's not real, said little Kelechi, her braids swinging as she spoke to her friends by the well. But she's hungry. I felt her in my sleep, looking for something. Looking for what? Asked her brother, his voice trembling. Kelechi shrugged, her eyes wide. Us. Obinna heard the whispers but dismissed them. Children lied. Villagers exaggerated. He had Obara, and she was enough. She was Nena's nose, his daughter's smile, the dream eyes that saw him when no one else did. He bathed her daily, pouring water from a calabash over her shoulders, watching it slide down her skin in rivulets that never quite dried. He dressed her in Nena's wrappers, tying them with care, though the fabric always seemed damp. He placed of her leaves in her hands, whispering prayers he hadn't spoken since his wife's death. Stay with me, he'd murmur, and her silence felt like a promise. Chike, his blacksmith friend, was less enchanted. He barged into Obinna's compound one afternoon, his hammer slung over his shoulder, sweat gleaming on his broad chest. You look like a corpse, he said, blunt as ever. When's the last time you ate something that wasn't grief? Obinna was kneeling by Obara, adjusting her wrapper. He didn't look up. Go away, Chike. Your hammer's louder than your sense. Chike snorted, leaning against the wall. Oh, I'm the senseless one? You're out here playing husband to a lump of clay, and I'm the fool. He gestured at Obara, her still form glowing faintly under the sun. She's not Nena, Obinna. She's not even human. Look at her eyes. Nothing's in there. Obinna's hands stilled. She's mine, he said, his voice low but fierce. She's what I made her to be. Chike shook his head, his grin fading. You made her, sure. But what's she making you? You're fading, my friend. Your hair's graying. Your back's bending. You're giving her something, and it's not just love. Obinna stood, his joints creaking like an old man's. You don't understand loss, Chike. You've never buried your heart. Chike's eyes darkened, a rare crack in his bravado. I buried my sister, Obinna. Don't talk to me about loss. But I didn't dig up forbidden clay to bring her back. You're not just grieving, you're feeding something. Obinna turned away, his chest tight. Chike's words stung, but Obara's presence soothed. She was there, always there, her damp hand a tether to a world where Nena and their daughter still lived, if only in her form. That night, the air was thick with the promise of rain, though the sky stayed clear. Obinna lay on his mat, Obara beside him, her body cool and unyielding. He drifted into a restless sleep, dreaming of the river, its waters red and churning, calling his name. He woke to a weight on his chest, not painful, but heavy, like hands pressing him into the earth. Obara was above him, her hollow eyes glinting in the moonlight. Her hands were buried in his chest, not cutting, not tearing, but molding, her fingers sinking into his flesh as if it were clay. Her touch was cold, wet, pulling at something deep inside him. He couldn't move, couldn't scream, only stare into those bottomless eyes. I need more to stay real, she whispered, her voice dripping like rain, each word a ripple in his soul. Clay dries, Obinna. It crumbles without life. He gasped, his breath shallow, his heart stuttering under her touch. What are you taking? He managed, his voice a rasp. Her smile was soft, almost tender, but it didn't reach her eyes. What you give freely, she said. Your love. Your years. Your essence. He wanted to push her away, to run, but his body wouldn't obey. Her hands pressed deeper, and he felt a pull, not just on his flesh but on something intangible, something that made him him. When she finally withdrew, her fingers left no mark, but Obinna felt hollow, as if she'd scooped out a piece of his soul. The next morning, he woke to sunlight streaming through the hut's open doorway. Obara sat by the drum tree, her wrapper pristine, her hollow eyes fixed on the horizon. Obinna staggered to his feet, his body aching as if he'd run through the hills all night. He caught his reflection in a bucket of water and froze. His beard, once black and thick, was streaked with grey. His eyes were sunken, his back bent like an elder's. He looked 10 years older, maybe more. Obinna. Chike's voice broke through his daze, urgent and sharp. The blacksmith stood at the gate, his hammer forgotten, his face pale. The river, it's red. Not mud, not clay, blood. And Mazi Okeke's goat is gone. Just bones by the bank. Obinna's stomach churned. He glanced at Obara, her serene form untouched by the morning's chaos. It's not her, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Chike grabbed his arm, his grip bruising. Not her? Then who, Obinna? You think the spirits are playing tricks for fun? Wake up. She's not your wife, not your daughter. She's something else, and it's eating you alive. Obinna yanked free, his heart pounding. She's mine, he said again, but the words felt like ash in his mouth. He turned to Obara, her damp skin glinting, her smile soft and knowing. Tell him, he said, his voice breaking. Tell him you're mine. Obara's head tilted, her hollow eyes meeting his. I am yours, she said, her voice a ripple. But you are also mine. Umuahia-Nta was dying. The hills, once green and proud, now sagged under grey haze, their slopes dotted with patches of blackened grass that crumbled to ash underfoot. The Ezichi River ran thick and red, not with blood, but something worse. something that clung to the skin and left a bitter taste in the mouth. The Udu drum tree outside Obinna's compound stood barren, its leaves fallen, its roots exposed like veins in a withered hand. The air was heavy with the stench of decay, not rot, but something older, hungrier, as if the earth itself was starving. The first body was found at dawn, sprawled by the riverbank. It was Mazi Okeke's nephew, a wiry boy who'd been tending goats. His skin was peeled back like the husk of a palm kernel. His bones, polished clean, gleamed under the morning sun. No blood, no flesh, just bones so smooth they seemed carved. The villagers gathered, their murmurs a low hum of fear. Spirits, some whispered. Witches, said others. But the children, bold and reckless, pointed to Obinna's compound, their voices trembling. It's her, they said. The clay woman. Obinna heard the whispers but didn't care. He was with Obara, always with Obara. She was no longer just a figure of clay turned flesh. She was radiant now. Her skin glowed like polished ebony, her movements fluid as the river in its better days. Her hair, black and sleek, cascaded over her shoulders, catching the light in ways that made Obinna's chest ache. Her wrapper clung to her curves, the yellow suns now vivid, as if they burned with their own light. But her shadow was wrong. It trailed behind her, sluggish and heavy, dragging across the ground like a reluctant slave, its edges frayed and shifting even when she stood still. He didn't question it. He didn't question her nightly absences, though he woke each morning to find her beside him, her damp hand on his chest, her hollow eyes watching. He didn't question the grey in his beard, the stoop in his shoulders, the way his hands trembled when he tried to carve. Obara was his. She was enough. She was Nena's nose, his daughter's smile, the dream eyes that held him when the world turned away. The village, however, was not so forgiving. The second body appeared 3 days later, a woman who sold yams at the market. Her bones were found in a cassava field, polished and bare. Then a third, an elder who'd gone to check his traps by the river. The village square became a place of shouts and prayers, of fists raised and kola nuts crushed underfoot. It's Obinna's doing, cried a man, his voice cracking with grief. He brought this curse. Chike, ever the skeptic, tried to calm them, his hammer slung over his shoulder like a challenge. You lot blame spirits for every stubbed toe, he said, his grin sharp but strained. Maybe it's wild dogs, or someone playing tricks. Nkechi, the young healer, shot him a look. Dogs don't peel skin like paper, Chike. And tricks don't leave bones shining like that. She clutched her pestle, her knuckles white. It's the clay. The Nta Endimuo. Obinna woke something he can't control. Chike snorted, but his eyes darted toward Obinna's compound, where Obara stood under the drum tree, serene and untouched. Then let's talk to him. Not scream like chickens before a hawk. They found Obinna kneeling by Obara, weaving fresh over leaves into her hair. His hands were slower now, his fingers gnarled like the roots of the drum tree. He looked up as they approached, his eyes sunken but defiant. What now, Chike? Come to tell me I'm mad again. Chike crossed his arms, his voice low. Mad's one thing, Obinna. This is worse. 3 bodies, all bones. The village thinks it's your bride. Obinna laughed, a cracked sound that echoed in the stillness. My bride? She's here, Chike. She doesn't wander. She doesn't eat. He glanced at Obara, her glowing skin a stark contrast to his own fading frame. Tell them, he said softly. Tell them you're mine. Obara's head tilted. Her hollow eyes glinted. I am yours, she said, her voice a ripple of water, smooth and cold. Always. Nkechi stepped forward, her herbs clutched like a shield. Yours? Then why does she walk at night? The children see her, Obinna, in their dreams, standing over them, humming. Her fingers, she shuddered, her voice dropping. They're long, wet, reaching. Obinna's jaw tightened. Children dream nonsense. You're a healer, Nkechi. Stick to your leaves. Before she could retort, a shadow fell over the compound. Adaku, the priestess of Umuahia-Nta, stood at the gate. Her staff rattled with cowrie shells, her red wrapper blazing like a warning. Her eyes were sharp as lightning, her presence heavy as the hills. "Obinna," she said, her voice cutting through the air. "You have gone too far. She is a vessel. Something else lives inside, something that feeds on memory, blood, and soul." Obinna rose, his bent back protesting. "She's all I have left," he cried, his voice raw, breaking on every word. "Nena's gone. My daughter's gone. But Obara, she's here. She's real." Adaku's staff slammed into the ground. The cowries clattered. "Real? She is a shadow wearing your grief. You think she's yours? Look at her shadow, Obinna. It moves when she does not. It hungers when she smiles." She pointed at Obara, whose shadow twitched, stretching toward the drum tree like a hand reaching for a throat. "You fed her your years, your heart. Now she takes more, bones, blood, the village itself." Obinna's eyes burned. Tears spilled down his weathered cheeks. "She's all I have left," he repeated, softer. "A plea." Adaku's voice rose, thunder in her words. "Then you have nothing." She turned to the villagers gathering behind her, their faces a mix of fear and fury. "This ends tonight. We burn the clay. We cleanse the river. We drive out what is woken." Obinna lunged forward, his frail body trembling. "You touch her and I'll..." "You'll what?" Chike cut in, voice hard now. No grin. "Die for her? You're halfway there, Obinna. Look at yourself. You're not a man anymore, you're a husk." Obinna staggered. His hand reached for Obara. Her skin was warm now, almost hot. Her glow, brighter than ever. "She's mine," he whispered. But the words felt like a lie. That night, the village prepared. Adaku led a procession to the river, staff raised, chants sharp and rhythmic. Nkechi mixed herbs, hand steady despite the fear in her eyes. Chike sharpened his machete, muttering curses under his breath. But Obinna stayed in his hut. Obara beside him, her hand on his chest, her hollow eyes watching. "You won't let them take me," she said, her voice a soft drip. "You made me, Obinna. You need me." He nodded, heart heavy, body frail. "I need you," he echoed. But as he spoke, he saw her shadow move, sliding across the wall, its fingers long and jagged, reaching for something he could not see. Umuahia-Nta was no longer a village. It was a wound. The hills, once guardians of the valley, now crumbled at their edges, shedding dirt like tears. The Udu drum tree stood skeletal, its roots clawing at the air as if trying to escape the earth. The Ezichi River, once the village's lifeblood, had become a sluggish vein of clay. Its surface cracked and dry, no longer reflected the sky. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, heavy and suffocating. The villagers moved like ghosts, their eyes constantly darting toward Obinna's compound, where the source of their fear resided. Obinna, the sculptor, was a shadow of the man he once was. His back was bent, his beard a tangle of grey, but for the first time in years, he smiled. Obara, his clay-born bride, had changed again. Her skin, once merely glowing, now shimmered with a warmth that rivaled the sun. Her movements had grown more graceful, her steps as light as if she danced on water. And her belly was swollen, rounded with what she claimed was their child. She cradled a mud-filled calabash, singing lullabies in a voice that dripped like rain, soft, hypnotic. "Our child," she'd whisper, her hollow eyes fixed on the calabash, "born of clay, born of us." Obinna wept when she told him. His tears fell onto the earth like offerings. "A child," he murmured, his voice cracking with joy. "Our child." He saw Nena in Obara's smile, his stillborn daughter in Obara's swollen form. He ignored the villagers' whispers, the polished bones, the missing goats. He dismissed Chike's warnings, Nkech's pleas, Adaku's chants. To him, Obara was family, his redemption. And now, she carried life, a miracle where death had reigned. The villagers did not see a miracle. They saw a curse. The bodies kept appearing, skin peeled, bones polished, found in fields, by the river, beneath the Iroko tree. The villagers spoke of apparato, a word even the children began to whisper. It meant disappeared. They spoke of Obara in their dreams, of her long, wet fingers reaching for their hearts. Her shadow, that dragging, wretched thing, was now seen even by the elders. It lingered by their huts, silent and hungry. Obinna did not care. He sat with Obara under the udu tree, the calabash cradled in her lap, her lullabies weaving through the air. "What will we name her?" he asked, his voice soft, almost childlike. Obara's lips curved, but her eyes remained hollow. "She will have a name when she is born," she said. "She will be ours." He nodded, his heart swelling. But deep within, a flicker of unease stirred. Her shadow moved behind her, sluggish and heavy, its fingers stretching toward the ground like roots seeking blood. He looked away, focusing on her face, Nena's nose, his daughter's smile. "Ours," he echoed. That night, under a moonless sky, Obinna woke to the sound of Obara singing. She stood by the doorway, the calabash in her hands, her voice floating through the darkness like mist. He watched her, mesmerized, as she set the calabash down and turned to him. "Look," she said. He rose, his joints aching, and approached the calabash. It was filled with wet red clay, glistening like blood. He leaned closer, breath-catching. In the clay's surface, he saw a reflection, not of the stars, nor of his own face, but of his eyes, wide and terrified, blinking back at him. The eyes were alive, watching him, knowing him. He staggered back, heart pounding. What is that?" Obara's smile vanished. "Our child," she said, voice sharp as a blade. "You gave it life." "No," he gasped. That's not a child." Her scream shattered the night. It wasn't grief, it was rage. Raw, primal. It shook the hut's walls, rattled the carved masks on their pegs, and made the earth itself tremble. Obinna dropped to his knees, ears ringing, vision blurred. When he looked up, Obara was gone. The calabash pulsed. The clay within rippled, as though something stirred beneath it. By morning, the village was in chaos. Every sculpture Obinna had ever made, masks, figurines, ancestral effigies, had melted into pools of red clay. They seeped into floors, stained the hands of those who tried to clean them. Then, the vanishings began. Mazi Okeke, owner of a sacred mask, gone. The yam seller's sister, who kept a fertility idol, gone. By noon, 5 people had vanished. Their homes were empty. Their families wailed. Chike stormed into Obinna's compound, machete in hand, his face carved with fury. "You see this?" he shouted, pointing to a puddle of clay. "Your work, Obinna. Your curse." Obinna sat under the drum tree. Obara was beside him, the calabash nestled in her lap. "It's not her," he murmured, weakly. "It's not." Chike laughed bitterly. "Not her? The river is clay now, Obinna. It's swallowing us whole." He raised the machete. "You're killing us. You and your thing." Obinna's hands shook as he reached for Obara's arm. Her skin was hot, burning. "She's mine," he whispered. Obara turned to him. "And you are mine," she said, her voice low and humming. "But you doubt me." Before he could respond, Adaku's voice thundered across the compound. The priestess stood at the gate, staff raised, cowries clattering with fury. "The river is clay. The earth is clay. Your bride is a plague, Obinna. She feeds on us all. Obinna stood, trembling. She's carrying my child, he cried. She's giving me a family. Adaku's staff slammed into the earth. A family, she bellowed. She is a vessel. Something older than the hills lives within her. Something that eats memory, blood, and bone. That calabash is no womb, it is a trap. Obinna turned to Obara. Her face glowed with serenity. Her shadow dragged behind her like a chain. You're wrong, he said. But his voice was a whisper, drowned by the hum of the river. Now a low, guttural moan. The village of Umuahia-Nta was no longer a place of life. It was a wound torn open, bleeding clay. The hills, once proud sentinels cradling the valley, were now slumped and crumbling, their slopes streaked with red clay that oozed like blood from a festering cut. The ATHS River, once a shimmering lifeline, was a stagnant, cracked expanse of clay, its surface refusing to reflect the sky, as if it had turned its back on the heavens. The Udu drum tree, rooted in the sorrow of Obinna's stillborn daughter, stood barren and twisted, its roots clawing upward like fingers fleeing the earth. The air was thick with the sour stench of wet earth, a heavy shroud that choked hope from the village. Obinna, the sculptor, was a husk of the man he'd been. His body was frail, his beard a wild grey tangle, his eyes sunken into hollows that mirrored Obara's own, deep, dark, and watching. The village had turned on him, their fear outweighing their pity. As dusk painted the sky in shades of ash, they came, a procession of torchlight and rage. Men carried ropes, their faces set with grim purpose. Women clutched torches, their flames flickering like nervous heartbeats. Children clung to their mothers' wrappers, whispering of the clay woman who haunted their dreams. Chike, the blacksmith, led them, his machete sheathed but his eyes hard as the iron he forged. Nkechi, the young healer, followed, her herb basket abandoned, her face etched with grief and resolve. At the forefront was Adaku, the priestess of Umuahia-Nta, her staff crowned with cowrie shells rattling like a warning, her red wrapper blazing like a war banner. They found Obinna in his compound, kneeling before Obara under the skeletal drum tree. Her skin was cracked like parched earth, red clay seeping from the fissures, yet her presence was undeniable, radiant, terrible, her bloated belly twitching as if something alive writhed within. The mud-filled calabash rested at her feet, its surface rippling faintly, as if it breathed. Obinna's hands trembled as he wove fresh of leaves into her jet-black hair, his voice a broken litany. "You're mine," he murmured, again and again, as if the words could stitch her cracking form together. "Obinna." Adaku's voice was thunder, shaking the heavy air. "Step away from her. Your time is done." He looked up, tears carving tracks through the dust on his weathered face, his eyes wild with desperation. "You can't take her," he said, his voice raw, splintering on every syllable. "She's all I have." Chike stepped forward, rope coiled in his calloused hands. "All you have." His voice was sharp, cutting through the dusk. "Look around, Obinna. The river's clay. Our people are bones, polished, empty bones. Your bride is devouring us." Obinna's gaze flickered to Obara, her cracked skin glowing faintly, her hollow eyes fixed on him with a depth that swallowed light. "She's carrying our child," he said, his voice trembling with a fragile joy. "She's giving me a family." Nkechi's voice cut in, sharp with anguish. "A child?" "Obinna, I saw the calabash. Those eyes, your eyes, aren't a child. They're a trap, pulling you apart piece by piece, and us with you." He shook his head, clutching Obara's arm. Her skin was hot and splitting, clay oozing like blood. "You don't understand," he said, his voice barely a breath. "She's Nena. She's my daughter. She's..." "Enough." Adaku's staff slammed into the earth, her cowrie shells clattering like a storm of bones. "She is no wife, no child. She is Nta in Dimuo, the clay of spirits, and you fed it your soul." She turned to the villagers, her eyes blazing like lightning. "Take him." Obinna fought as the men seized him, his frail body thrashing like a trapped animal. "No," he screamed, his voice cracking the air. "You can't take her. She's mine." But his strength was gone, sapped by years given to the clay. They dragged him to the Udu drum tree, its barren branches looming like a judge. The ropes bit into his wrists, binding him to the gnarled trunk, the same roots that cradled his daughter's grave now holding him captive. The villagers stepped back, their torches casting flickering shadows, their faces a mix of fear and fury. Obinna's chest heaved, his breath ragged. "Obara," he whispered, his eyes locked on her. She stood still, her cracked form glowing under the torchlight, her belly pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. The calabash at her feet seemed to hum, a low, guttural sound that matched the river's moan. Chike stood before him, his machete still sheathed but his hands clenched. "You did this, Obinna," he said, his voice low, stripped of its usual sarcasm. "You dug where you shouldn't. Now we pay the price." Obinna's tears fell, mixing with the clay at his feet. "I loved her," he said, his voice breaking. "I loved them both." Nkechi stepped closer, her eyes wet but her voice steady. "Love doesn't do this, Obinna. Love doesn't eat bones. Love doesn't turn rivers to clay." Before Obinna could respond, Obara moved. Her steps were slow, deliberate, each one leaving a wet smear on the earth. Her shadow dragged behind her, sluggish and heavy, its edges frayed like a torn cloth. She stopped before Obinna, her hollow eyes meeting his, and for a moment, he saw Nena in her face, her stubborn chin, her sharp nose. His heart ached, a wound that would never close. "Obinna," she said, her voice dripping like rain, soft but heavy with finality. She leaned forward, her cracked lips brushing his forehead, a kiss that burned cold. "I was born from love twisted by grief. I return now to silence." He froze, her words sinking into him like a blade. "Obara, no," he whispered, straining against the ropes. "Stay, please." She didn't answer. Her body shuddered, a low crack echoing through the square. Then, with a sound like a pot dropped from a roof, she burst. Her form collapsed, clay exploding outward in a wave of wet, red mud that drenched the village square. It coated the ground, the drum tree, the villagers' feet, a flood of earth that smelled of river and ruin. Obinna screamed, his voice lost in the chaos, his body sagging against the ropes. The villagers stood frozen, torches sputtering, as the mud settled. In the center of the square, where Obara had stood, was a heart-shaped lump of red earth, pulsing faintly, as if it still held a spark of her. Adaku stepped forward, her staff raised, her face unreadable. "It ends here," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She knelt, scooping the lump into her hands. Its surface was warm and slick. Without a word, she carried it to the drum tree, digging a shallow grave beside the roots where Obinna's daughter lay. She buried it, covering it with earth, her lips moving in a silent prayer to Amadioha. The village was silent, the air heavy with the weight of what had been done. Obinna slumped against the tree, his sobs quiet now, his body too weak to fight. The clay was gone, but so was he. Hollow, broken. A man who had sculpted his own doom. If you made it to the end of the story, share your thoughts and lessons in the comments or simply tell us where you're watching from. And if this tale of love and curses gripped you, hit that like button and subscribe for more haunting stories. Ring the bell to never miss a tale from us. And until next time, beware what you sculpt from grief.